Welcome everybody to the American Club of Hamburg online. I'm David Zeller, president of the club. And tonight we have a guest that was here in the summer because he was on a very running for an interesting seat. It was the seat vacated by Mark Meadows, Trump's chief of staff, which has an interesting story to itself of how he vacated. I think it was in December of last year, and sort of let people know, announced it on the last day to be able to register to become a candidate. And a few people squeezed in quickly. One of them was Trump's pick and Mark Meadows' pick. And she ended up losing in the primary against Madison Cawthorn in the Republican primary. And our speaker tonight ran against Madison Cawthorn. We'll get to that in just a minute. But first of all, I'll tell you a little bit about Moe Davis. Moe, I read the story in the summer, a very interesting story about that seat vacancy and the upset that Madison Cawthorn was able to pull in winning the Republican nomination. And then I read about who his opponent would be, and Moe Davis. Moe Davis has an very interesting story of his own. He was a colonel in the Air Force?
Correct.
He was a colonel in the Air Force, and he was in charge of military prosecutions. In fact, was in charge of the prosecutions going on at the time at Guantanamo. So it was a very high coverage event of the prosecutions going on there. And he actually was a conscientious objector and refused to take testimony from that was conducted under any form of torture. And at that time, waterboarding there was testimony taken under that form, and he stepped back from his position. And so he gained he was a bit in the spotlight back then, and then he decided to run for the 11th. This vacated seat from Mark Meadows, the 11th district in North Carolina, which is the very western part of the state. It actually covers quite a large geography because it's not so densely populated in that part of the state, but so it covers quite a large territory. And we had Colonel Moe Davis on in the summer to hear about, just to get his take of what it was like to be running at that time. And thankfully, he's agreed to come back now post-election. That area is an extremely red part of the country. So Cook Political Report had already deemed that it would be called it for going Republican, which it indeed did happen. But Moe came pretty close. He actually garnered much more vote than was expected. So it made it more of a closer race than was expected. So ladies and gentlemen, let's all say hi to Moe Davis. Okay, Moe.
Hello. Thanks for having me back. I really do appreciate it.
So now that the election is over, sort of, at least on paper, can you tell us a little bit about your take on the state of the affairs? We just passed the safe harbor date for the Electoral College, and they'll be voting on the 14th. But yet Trump has still refused to accede, and he's to throw in the hat, throw in the towel. And he's in fact they're launching now, just as of last night, right? 17 attorneys general have joined the attorney general from Texas in his disputing the election here from some of the states. Can you tell us about that? What's the latest state of that, and do you think it will gain traction?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much news you're getting over there, but certainly here, that's the constant topic of discussion on all the news shows. It's really disappointing that roughly 75 million Americans voted for Trump, and a significant number of those have bought into the narrative that the election was rigged, which, if Democrats rigged the election, they did a poor job of rigging. Because if you recall, I think when we spoke last summer, I think a lot of Democrats were really optimistic that given the political landscape, having a very unpopular president that never in his 4 years, never reached 50% approval. And in the midst of a pandemic, that by election day, about 250,000 Americans had died from COVID-19. It seemed like the political landscape was ripe for the Democrats. I think people went into election day thinking, priority one was winning the White House, and then secondary to that, I think a lot of Democrats believed we would have a clear majority in the Senate and additional seats in the House, and that many of the state houses would also go blue. And as it turned out, we only achieved one of those four objectives, and that's the White House. But you could see, Trump's been planting the seeds for over a year about this was going to be a rigged election, and you can't trust mail, which you folks I know do mail-in voting. And when I was in the military, that's how a large number of military folks vote and have for over a century. But he began planting the seeds of doubt that it was going to be, I think he knew he was not going to win on election day. And so he planted the seeds that this was going to be rigged. And so he's trying not to win based on votes, but by persuading people that the election was rigged. And, these lawsuits, I've lost track of the number now. It's like 1 for 50, I think.
Yeah.
They had one lawsuit. It was on a procedural issue. It didn't really impact the results, but that's the only victory they've had. They've been shut out consistently. The Supreme Court a few days ago, there was an injunction filed, and it was apparently no dissenters in turning it down. So I think most folks believe the current lawsuit by Texas is pretty brazen. Particularly folks on the other side are really, they like to use the states' rights as kind of a buzzword for them. And for one state to try to intervene in another state and say that you didn't conduct your election properly is a pretty brazen proposition, particularly if you believe in states' rights. And it's essentially rehashing the arguments that have been made in many of the other lawsuits that have been rejected. And you've had, there have been a number of judges that were Trump appointees that have tossed out these lawsuits, and many of them have commented that, just saying it was, fraud doesn't make it fraud. You've got to have evidence and specific allegations, and there are none. So I think most folks that, that follow the Supreme Court, I know Ben Wittes, many of you may know Ben, he was saying he thought it was about as close to zero as you could get that the Supreme Court would entertain this. And I think most folks believe it's just these attorney generals, and these are all states that Trump won. Apparently there was no fraud whatsoever in any of the states that he won. It's just the states that he lost that apparently were rigged. And I think most folks believe they're doing it just because they're afraid of Donald Trump, and they want to, curry favor with him. We were talking before everybody else joined in about what's going to happen on Inauguration Day. Yes. And I think a lot of folks believe that he's not going to go away quietly and is going to continue to have influence in the Republican Party. And I think a lot of these folks are getting on board and really making a mockery of the judicial process. But I think they've weighed the pros and cons and think they see advantage in not alienating Donald Trump.
Do you think that I heard a comment by Michael Moore this morning about saying that similar to De Blasio when he stood up with he was making a speech to the police department and they just stood up and turned their backs on him. Could you imagine this, something along these lines, that sort of almost boycotting the current administration after January 20th?
Yeah, well, I think you're certainly going to have a not insignificant segment of the American public that aren't going to accept that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are the legitimate winners. I saw a statistic this morning. I forgot who did the polling, but I think it's like 62%, accept that the election results. But if you break it down by party, it's like 95% of Democrats believe it was a fair election. And on the Republican side, I think the number I saw was 26%. And for independents, it was in the mid 60s. So, you're going to have a fairly large segment of, millions of Americans that are going to accept the narrative that somehow Joe Biden stole the election. Again, if the Democrats had rigged the election, I think we would have won House seats and Senate seats and state houses. So it's just a bizarre theory, but we have a lot of Americans that believe in conspiracy theories that are kind of out on the fringe.
We've had this past week the numbers, just watching the numbers of corona infections, well over 200,000 for at least the whole week, and no sign of abating. And it seems that Biden went, as soon as it was after he gave his speech, sort of that acceptance event that he had, he went to, on day one, he was already working on COVID as priority number one, addressing it daily. Whereas Trump seems to, well, it's not part of his press conferences except to take a victory lap on the vaccines. Although the vaccine, as we know, was made in Germany here. So how is that coming across? How is Biden's addressing the corona? How is that coming across, especially with people, with Republican voters?
Yeah, it really is unfortunate that COVID became a political issue rather than a public health issue. And you're exactly right. You're still seeing on the Republican side, you saw where Rudy Giuliani was hospitalized with COVID, and this afternoon he said that still downplaying it, saying masks aren't a big deal, and that the key to it is to get treated quickly, and if you do, there's no chance you're going to die. So they're still downplaying the risk. As yesterday was the first time we've had over 3,000 deaths in a day. So we lost more Americans yesterday than we did on 9/11. And it's a result of 9/11. We radically altered the way we live in order to try to avoid having another tragedy like that. But here we have, we're at 290,000 deaths, and you still can't get people to take it seriously. And again, it falls largely, we were talking a minute ago about the percentage of people that accept the election results. The people that the view on COVID-19, unfortunately, kind of follows a very similar trend line, with Democrats, taking it seriously, and a majority of independent voters. But on the Republican side, it's something less than half that are taking it seriously. And certainly, I think, I was talking with a political science professor this morning who's writing a book on the 2020 election. And we're talking about, COVID-19 really had a significant impact on the way the election was conducted. Hopefully with the vaccines, this will be a once in a lifetime event, but it really had a big impact on the election, and it's certainly having a big impact on our economy. And you've seen the numbers, I'm sure, on the number of Americans. Congress continues to debate on another relief package. We've got millions of folks that are at risk of losing their homes, and you probably saw the pictures. I think it was in Texas, where the thousands of people lined up in their cars, to get food distribution. So, we're not out of the woods yet. I think the vaccine is certainly a huge step, but I think the worst is still yet to come before we get on the other side of this.
Onto another topic. Biden's been very busy picking his cabinet, and I just saw today Susan Rice was also added as an advisor, and but I think the primary one of Secretary of Defense, General Lloyd Austin, he's only been out of the military service for 4 years, and under statutes you're supposed to be out for 7 years to be considered, unless you have a waiver like Mad Dog had under Trump was exactly the same situation. He got the waiver. How do you think this is going to play out? Do you think that Austin will be approved, or?
Yeah, I think he'll be approved, but it's putting some Democrats in a bit of a bind. This will be the third time in the history of the Department of Defense that it's required a waiver. As you mentioned, General Mattis required one, and there were a number of Democrats that voted against granting the waiver for Mattis. So it's putting them in a bit of a bind to say, well, we opposed it when Trump did it, but we're okay with it when Biden does. Again, it gets back to the kind of hypocrisy that we're quick to criticize the other side for doing things that don't pass the smell test, but then when we have the opportunity, we do the same thing. It's a bit hypocritical. Of course, for them, being hypocritical is just another day at the office. I'd like to think Democrats take it a little more seriously, but so I think there will be some difficulty, but I think ultimately he'll be approved. I've never met him, but from folks that I've heard from military folks, he's very well respected in military circles. And I think certainly after the last 4 years that, where we've had a commander in chief that, we hold 18-year-old recruits that are showing up today for basic training to a higher standard than our commander in chief, that some adult leadership, that you can trust and have confidence in, is long overdue. And I think a lot of military folks are really, counting down the next 42 days till we can get back to sensibility and responsibility and have a chain of command that you can have confidence in that, they've got your back.
I just want to also say to everybody, thank everyone for joining on this call. If you have questions, please go ahead and send them to me in the chat function, and that way I'll send you a message to let you know that you'll be next. So please send me your questions. In the meantime, how about what's your take on Blinken, Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State nominee? I suppose it's a nominee, right? He has to be approved.
Yeah, that has to be confirmed. I think you mentioned Susan Rice. I think the position is an advisor, doesn't require confirmation, but certainly, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, those will. It's I think a huge improvement over Pompeo, but I think a lot of Democrats, particularly progressives, are a little. Biden's catching a little bit of grief from the left side that some of his appointments aren't as progressive as they would have wanted. But again, I think by comparison, he's made some pretty solid picks. These are folks that are experienced and responsible and know what they're doing, and I think have America's best interest at heart. Another one today that I saw, I was really interested. I don't know if I mentioned last time, I was hoping to serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee. We have an excellent VA hospital here in Asheville. And Dennis McDonough is going to be the nominee for Veterans Affairs, who was part of the Obama administration, worked in national security. And I think that's a real solid pick. So that's good for veterans, I think, having him there. But I think on the whole, I've been, you saw Marsha for HUD, Vilsack for agriculture. I think, they've been pretty solid picks in my view. Again, there's going to be some grumbling from the left and the right, but I think that's okay.
How about Janet Yellen as Treasury Secretary?
Yeah, certainly. Well, first female to hold the post. Certainly extremely well qualified. So I think it's a very solid pick. I haven't heard a whole lot of griping about. Most of the attention has gone to the General Austin nomination and the ramifications for that. But most folks I know that I was on a Zoom yesterday with a group here in Asheville. There's an economist that comes on every year and does his annual assessment, and he was very optimistic about 2021 and 2022 economically, but he was also thought Yellen was a real solid pick for that job.
It sure will be a challenge though, because the economy, the effects are only barely beginning to be felt, right? 2021, it will be quite a challenging year economically, you see?
It will. It's going to, again, I think Congress is still having discussions about some form of package to help folks. Particularly, if you've been here to Asheville, our economy here is tourism dependent. And so we have a lot of folks who are really, restaurants and folks involved in that kind of trade that are really struggling to survive. And so we need to do something to, I was really pleased. I think after I'd met with you folks, Andrew Yang, endorsed me and helped out with the campaign. And he's been a big advocate for direct payments that, which many other countries have done. That until we're on the other side of this, that we ought to be putting money directly into the pockets of families in this country to where they can put food on the table. There's a huge wave of evictions and foreclosures on the horizon, and it's a difficult question. I've met with folks here in our area where you have businesses, restaurants in particular, that and music venues. You can't have events like that, but they're struggling to survive and pay their rent, and then landlords. You hear the small business owners, and you think, well, gee, surely the landlords will cut them a break. Then you talk to the landlords, and they're saying, look, we have a mortgage on the building, and the bank is breathing down our neck to make the payment on. So it's a difficult time we're in. So hopefully this vaccine is going to be the panacea, and we can put this behind us by this time next year. But we've got some rough months ahead. I don't know if you saw the jobless numbers today for the past week. We're up in I forget the exact number, mid 800,000s, which was higher than expected. So it's kind of been a mixed bag. The stock market continues setting record highs, but that's just not a reflection of the economy. For folks here on Main Street, it's tough going right now.
I had heard something this morning on a podcast that the reason they said that Mitch McConnell, that everyone seems to be on board with the new package in the Senate as well, but Mitch McConnell's holding it up because he's trying to, they have a clause in there to exonerate or to remove all liability of corporations for any suits over COVID.
Right. Yeah. What he wants to do is, even if you're a business owner is grossly negligent, you may have seen here, I forget where it was, I think maybe in Iowa, it's one of the food processing plants, one of the big mega corporation, that the plant manager, they had like side bets going on how many of the workers were going to get sick and die. Mm-hmm. So, they knew they were putting their lives at risk. And what McConnell wants is just blanket immunity, that even if you are deliberately, I can understand if, in good faith, you're doing all the things you can to make the work environment safe and COVID still gets in there. I don't have a problem with that. Folks who are grossly negligent or deliberately put people at risk is really just not right.
Because they already wasn't there a stipulation back then that the meatpacking plants were exempt, or sort of exempt from prosecution, right?
Right.
Now it's almost a general pardon, right, for all large corporations.
Well, I think for any business owner, small or large, that you're just totally immune. If your workers contract COVID at work, then you have no responsibility.
Yeah. And we have John Kerry also back for climate czar. How impactful will he be in that? And will that also be a big boon towards a form of a Green New Deal or green infrastructure projects? How do you see that?
Yeah, I think so. That was one I think really got a lot of positive reaction. Certainly John Kerry is very well respected. I would imagine over in Europe that folks there are excited to see America hopefully get back into the Paris Accords and get back on the right track on the environment. And putting someone like him in that position, I think, is a real clear signal that this is a priority. So yeah, I'm really optimistic that alternative energy and the environment, the Trump administration, everything they can to try to, roll back as many protections as possible. And I imagine the next 42 days is going to be, a scorched earth policy. But hopefully the Biden administration can come in behind that and clean things up.
In general, what do you see mainly as the biggest challenges coming up to leading? Well, first of all, we have challenges leading up just until Inauguration Day, and then obviously with the first 100 days is always sort of a yardstick that people look at with incoming administrations, and I thought that was interesting that Biden also gave sort of a homework to the country and say that he would like the people to wear masks for the first 100 days, which is just, living in Europe, it's unbelievable that even needs to be articulated. But what do you see as the biggest challenges facing Biden-Harris?
Well, I think COVID, I think, is priority one. As I said, yesterday, I don't know what the numbers are going to be like today, but yesterday was the first day we had over 3,000 deaths, and with winter, getting colder here as winter, approaches. I think they're saying next week will be the first round of vaccinations here in the U.S., but it's going to take, probably, well into next year, into the summer, before nearly everyone is vaccinated. We're also likely to get into the debate over whether, I think there'll be a lot of folks that are going to refuse to take the vaccine. So I think COVID is going to continue to be it should have been a top priority for the current administration. I think it will be a top priority for the Biden administration. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. There's a lot of attention here on the Senate races in Georgia. I think, I forget the exact number. Biden would be the first president coming into office that didn't have a majority in quite some time. And it's really going to, winning those two seats or losing those two seats is going to be pivotal in his ability to get things done or not get things done. So I'm really hopeful. Georgia surprised me. I lived up in Virginia for 14 years before moving back to North Carolina, and Virginia was solid red when I got there and solid blue when I left. And I kind of thought that trend was creeping down the East Coast, but I thought North Carolina would get there before Georgia. So Georgia really surprised me. Stacey Abrams deserves a lot of credit for the groundwork she did to get people registered and get them out to vote. And I'm hopeful. The two Senate races, certainly in my view, the two Republican candidates are just horrible people. In addition to being bad candidates, they're just not nice people. And it really would help Biden if we had if Mitch McConnell didn't hold the levers of power the way he has. So I think a lot of what's going to happen in the first 100 days is going to depend on what happens on January 5th down in Georgia.
Yeah, it's an amazing race there. The debates also, the Kelly Loeffler and that was, and of course her husband is the owner of the New York Stock Exchange. I mean, the stock exchange, right?
Yeah, you have to give her credit. At least she showed up for the debate. Purdue refused to show up. So Asa, was debating a empty podium.
Because he cleaned up on him on the first debate. That was quite a statement that he had there. Yeah, that's the drama of this whole season. And then to be leading up until this the until January, until the special runoff. You couldn't write such a script for Hollywood, right? It's just and
Well, it's
have
really
the
been
two
bizarre.
seats.
I don't know how much news you're getting over there, but you've had this whole narrative about the rigged election. And so you've got a lot of Republicans in Georgia saying, I'm not going to vote in a rigged election,
Yeah.
which is, obviously contrary to their interest in trying to win these two seats. So, the carnage that Trump has done is could have an impact on the election there.
Okay, I think I'm getting a question coming in from Taylor. Taylor, if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask your question directly. Hi.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
What is your opinion on the first presidential debate? For me, it was very strange for a man who has media experience and knew how to manipulate the media attention. That debate was a total disaster and clearly impacted his any chance at re-election by far. So how do you explain that his performance in the first debate?
Yeah, the first presidential debate was just an embarrassment. I know a lot of Republicans, a lot of folks that have bought into the Trump narrative, like that combative, disruptive tone. But I think by and large, it didn't play well. It was just an embarrassment for the entire country to think that, those are the two people competing for, the highest office in the land. So I don't know, it's going to be really interesting to see. I know some of the political prognosticators have said that, once Trump leaves office, he's going to lose the bully pulpit and won't have the clout that he does. They analogize to other ex-presidents, when they leave, that they tend to kind of fade away. But I just don't see Trump fading away quietly. It seems, it'll be interesting to see on Inauguration Day. There's certainly a lot of speculation that he's going to have a counter event to try to usurp the inauguration for Biden, that he'll have an event announcing his run for 2024. And if you've been following this whole election fraud thing, he's raised over $200 million off of this false claim about the fraudulent election. So I think he sees this in the next 4 years as an opportunity to make money and to continue bilking people, folks that are gullible enough to buy into that narrative and, that are oblivious to facts. Anybody with any common sense, I think, can see the absurdity of the claims that are being made. But again, there are millions of people, and a vast majority of, I think the number I saw the other day, a news organization had polled all of the Republican members of Congress on whether Biden won the election. I think there were 27 that said he did, and the rest either declined to answer or said no. So I don't know. I'm hopeful when he leaves office, it'll kind of break this spell that seems to have captured so many people. But I think he'll just continue to play the same game he's been playing, and a lot of folks are happy to play along with him.
Okay, I have a question from Tommy Atwell. Tommy?
Yes. So obviously there's still a lot to process here, and a lot of this is ongoing, but I'm just curious, if and when the dust settles, what are we going to do to heal?
Yeah, that's well, if you get an answer, I'd love to hear it. It's a difficult, the nation is so polarized. It's like, I don't know if you saw Rush Limbaugh yesterday said that, we need to have, the Trump states need to secede from the union, that there's no way that the two sides can coexist. And there's a lot of, folks that buy into that sentiment. But I don't know, you would think something like COVID, a crisis of that magnitude would be something that would unify, but instead it's divided even further. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer on how we get the country back on the same. I may have mentioned when I spoke with you folks before, like, I'm 62 years old, and I know, when I grew up, my family used to watch the nightly news. And back then, it was CBS, ABC, and NBC. When Walter Cronkite said, and that's the way it is, that's the way it was. And regardless of which of the news networks you watched, you essentially got the same facts. Now, you could disagree on what the policy implication ought to be based on those facts, but nowadays we can't even agree on what the facts are. So I don't know. It's a tough one. I don't know how we do it, but we've got to. We can't continue doing what we've been doing. And I'm really concerned. I hope, Democrats have got to get their act together between now and 2022, or it's going to be a bloodletting. Like I said, I think the environment going into this election seemed like it was about as favorable as it could be for Democrats, and we did poorly. And the other side has been very effective. You may have seen there's been some debate between AOC and Abigail Spanberger from Virginia over, and Obama kind of got into it as well with the defund the police and the socialism label. The other side used very effectively to scare folks. And Democrats have to figure out an answer to that over the next 23 months, or we're going to lose the House. And if that happens, Biden's going to have a really tough, second half of his first term if we don't have either the House or the Senate behind him. But we've got to figure out some way to address those. With socialism in particular, my opponent was big on, he wants to go fight socialism, but I don't think he has a clue what it is. But it works. It scares people, and it gets them to vote against their own interests. But we've got a lot of work to do. I was really pleased to see Sean Patrick Mahoney is going to be the new head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. I think he'll be more assertive than perhaps we were this time. But it's less than 23 months till the next election, and Democrats have got some work to do, or we're not going to fare well in 2022.
And what would you? Oh, am I on mute now? What would you say that entails? You say the Democrats have to get their act together. What does that mean in practical terms? What needs to be addressed? What needs to be done?
Well, it's going to, soon we're going to have the districts across the country are going to get redrawn based on the census. So I know here in North Carolina, we currently have 13 House seats. We're going to pick up at least one more seat, potentially two. I think, the census count, the participation rate here in North Carolina was not great. So we're going to get at least one more seat, and the boundaries are going to get redrawn. And so, the landscape is going to change. Like, the district here, I lost by 12 points. If you look back, when Mark Meadows ran in 2016, when Trump was on the ticket, he won by 29 points in 2016. He won by 20 in 2018, and we lost by 12 this time. So the trend line in the 11th Congressional District is moving in the right direction. We're still losing, but we're losing by less. And when the boundaries get redrawn to create another district, the part that'll get taken out of the 11th, every district's gonna have to give up, to make the math work, each district's gonna have to give up something to create a new district. And whatever comes out of the 11th will have to come off the eastern boundary, because we're kind of landlocked by Tennessee and Georgia and South Carolina. Those eastern counties are all ruby red. So we're gonna become a little less red, next time around. But we've got to have an answer for, well, number one, I think it really handicapped Democrats that we chose to be responsible and not do traditional campaigning and put people at risk because of COVID. So we didn't have the big rallies. We didn't go door to door. And the other side did. They just ignored it. So I think that was a real handicap. And then, like I said, as well, the messages, the defund the police. I agree with President Obama. The underlying notion, I think, is a legitimate notion, but the label we put on it, the other side just, it was a giveaway to them that they were able to. I don't know if you saw the ads over there, but here locally, there were ads where, it's a lady in distress dials 911. And the voice on the other end said, "I'm sorry, we've been defunded. We can't help you." That hurt, in a lot of these, areas that aren't, AOC, type districts. And then the socialism label that, without defining what they mean by, what is it they consider to be socialist that they're fighting against? I mean, people here in this district, every one of our counties, the percentage of people that don't have healthcare coverage is above the national average. So using this socialism label to get folks to vote against their own interests, they've done effectively. So we need to be able to educate people on, just because the government, and we're spending, on healthcare, we're spending more than any country in the world on healthcare. And we've got over 30 million people, over 1 million North Carolinians don't have healthcare coverage. So we need to have a better message on, why we, the average person, their interests are better served on the Democratic side than the Republican side. And I think we've got to be, I was disappointed, here in this district that, for my opponent, President, Trump came here, Trump Jr. came here twice, other members of the Trump family came, and, on the Democratic side, there was none of that level of attention. So we've got to have a better ground game, and it turned out, I think nationwide, particularly here in, I know North Carolina better, in our 13 districts, we've had the issue of gerrymandering. The results in all 13 districts turned out exactly like the district was configured. The closest race in our 13 districts was 6.6 points. Most of the others were, 20, 30, 40 point blowouts.
All safe seats, yeah.
All safe seats. There was not really a competitive race in any of the 13 districts. They all went exactly the way they were drawn to go. And I can tell you in my race here, we ended up raising, I think, $2.3 million. I think had we raised $2.3 thousand, the result would have probably been essentially the same, because people voted party line. If you look at, in our 17 counties, if you look at the results for Joe Biden or Cal Cunningham or myself, there wasn't 2 points of difference in any of the 17 counties. Or even Roy Cooper, our governor who won re-election, in this district, he would have lost by about 8 points. So people just voted party line. Nothing seemed to break through. So we've got to figure out a way to reach those people. I can, at least in a rural area like we're in, one of the folks here said, we need more Democrats to get out and join the volunteer fire department. And I think there's some truth to that, in a lot of these rural counties, folks need to see that Democrats are regular folks like them, and that these labels that are getting slapped on us are, don't fit.
Yeah, it is really amazing to see. It's not just people here, they call it the red states or the blue states, but it's really just the urban versus rural areas.
It really is.
Very, very clear.
Yeah, in our 17 counties, now Asheville is the, what we would consider the metropolitan area, the urban area. And Buncombe County, where we are, is the only county west of Charlotte that voted Democratic. All the other rural counties, some were 75%, for Trump. And those counties are the ones where you have the highest levels of poverty, folks without health care coverage, but they're solidly in the Republican camp.
Yeah, that seems like the biggest thing that the Democrats need to do, is because those used to be their constituents, right? To reach out to them.
In the last 25 or 30 years, I'd say we gave up on the rural areas, but we haven't given them the attention. You know, those folks feel alienated. There really is, I think, that rural-urban divide that you know, is probably, like you said, probably deeper than the red-blue divide. It's just that sense of, you know, the folks out in the country don't think people in the city understand them or care about them.
Okay, I'd like to go to Rosalini. You have a question?
Okay, yes, I do. I have a couple questions, but one of them is whether Trump, as an exiting president, he could create any type of disruption on January 20th, because I'm so worried that he's just been so crazy and doing a circus of the whole thing of what is going to happen on January 20th.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'll feel better after December the 14th. I think the only, like I said, I don't think the court challenge is going to get any traction. But one of the things Trump has tried to do is to have the state legislators appoint, you know, the electors that will actually cast the electoral college votes, to have them vote contrary to the vote in their state. And, you know, that's a, yeah, it's a risk. I don't think it's a grave risk, but I think that's one that they're really working on now, is trying to persuade the states to have some of their electors vote contrary to the way the voters in those states voted. I think if we get past December 14th and Joe Biden has won the electoral college, then I think the risk is significantly less, but I think it's going to be, you know, continued for the next 42 days. I think it's going to be just, you know, a scorched earth policy by Trump. And on the 20th, again, I think he will try to do something to upstage the inauguration of Joe Biden. But I don't know, we got to keep our fingers crossed for the next 42 days.
Mm-hmm. Anyway,
I follow up, but
yes, David allowed me a follow-up question, and it is along what you already said, and it's something that worries me so much. And I've been, after the election, sometimes so mad and going on Twitter to discredit the lies. And I feel that whoever controls the message for the Democratic Party is not doing a good of a job, because the Republicans are driving these misinformation campaigns like Stop the Steal, which is tied to Roger Stone in 2016, playing a dirty game and with so many lies, and they are capitalizing on it. And I feel like the Democrats are taking a beating, lying down, whilst the Democrats have the reason. I mean, comparing what happened with Trump trying to discredit the election and say it was rigged. I mean, when Bush is racing against Gore, Bush won Florida for 537 votes, which is less than 0.009% of the more than 6 million votes cast. And he did not get a recount. So talking about hypocrisy, why aren't we, or the Democratic Party or Biden's campaign, ringing those bells to show the huge discrepancy and hypocrisy and irony of all of this, when he's complaining and fighting in Georgia because of this and that, to try to overturn more than 12,000 votes, when Gore conceded with 500 vote difference. Yeah. This to me is, I feel outraged. So I am wondering who and how can the Democratic Party or Biden's campaign team do better in responding to this, because I think the silence is deafening, you know?
Yeah, I think we definitely have to do better on messaging. The other side is, very effective. Even if it's a complete lie, they come up with stop the steal. They come up with a catchy phrase. They drive it home. They all get behind it. We seem to be a much more, diverse party. And, I have to assume, trying to run the Democratic Party is like trying to herd cats. It's a tough group where the Republicans just fall in line and do what Trump tells them to do. But you're exactly right. We've got to do a better job of messaging. We've got a good message. We're just not good at telling it. I think I may have mentioned when I spoke with you last time, our side is really good on writing 20-page position papers that nobody ever reads, and their side writes bumper stickers. But we've got to get better at doing that and telling our story. That for working class people, I think their interests are much more closely aligned with ours than they are with the other side. But we just get out messaged, and we've got to learn and figure out how to do it better. Or we're gonna, like I said, I'm concerned that 2022 that it's going to be a bad year if we don't get our act together quickly. Because again, it's less than 23 months until we go back to the booth to vote again.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Now, you joined, you became a politician a bit later in life. When did you actually begin? When did you begin? And was it just when this seat opened up for Mark Meadows?
Yeah, it really did. My wife and I moved to Asheville in May of 2019. We're building a house, which I'm thankful we were finally in. I retired. I was a judge at the Department of Labor up in Washington. So I officially retired in September of 2019. And at that point, I thought I was retired. And it was November of 2019 is when the state court here told our legislature they had to redraw the boundaries, or the court was going to do it because of gerrymandering. That's like where I'm sitting right now. I'm literally in the 10th Congressional District, the Patrick McHenry District, because this is the gerrymandered part of Asheville. Now, starting in January, this will be in the 11th Congressional District. So it wasn't until November of last year when the court ordered that the boundaries be redrawn. And they had to, it was apparent that Asheville and Buncombe County had to get reconnected because you couldn't explain splitting Asheville down the middle. I don't know if I mentioned this to you last time I talked to you. I did a Zoom with a group of students from the University of North Carolina at Asheville. And there was a young lady on the Zoom that was saying that her freshman year in the dorm, she had the bed on the west side of the room. So she was in the 11th Congressional District, but her roommate had the bed on the east side of the room. She was in the 10th Congressional District.
Crazy.
That's how, they literally, the line ran through the middle of Asheville, through the middle of the university. And depending on, which bed you slept in dictated which congressional district you lived in. So it was, when it became apparent they had to put it back together that, you don't have to live in the district to run in it, but to me, it didn't seem right to live in the 10th district and run in the 11th. And so it was when it became apparent they were going to put this area back into the 11th that, I decided to, again, I still am. I got in because my concern was, my belief was I've spent too many years defending democracy to watch it go down the drain. And I figured if I wasn't going to do it, who was? And so I got in and, it was I'm disappointed in the outcome, but I enjoyed the process. I got to meet a lot of great people. I got to visit places I'm pretty sure I probably wouldn't have gone but for running. But I'm still concerned about democracy. As somebody mentioned earlier, how do we bring the country back together? I wish I had a good answer for that. I don't, but we can't keep doing what we've been doing, or our democracy really is in jeopardy.
Did the was that, did I depict it correctly? I think it's just from what I recall reading back in the summer, was that Mark Meadows sort of waited till the final day to declare that he was giving up the seat. That it was like the final day to be able to register your candidacy.
Yeah, it was. There's still a lot of animosity on the Republican side to the way he handled it. In North Carolina, there's I think it's a 17-day period. I think it was December 2nd till the noon on December 19th that you could register to run for office. And he waited until the morning of December the 18th to announce that he wasn't going to run, which meant, on the Republican side, you had just over 24 hours. And as I learned, it's not an easy, people talk about jumping into the race. There's no jumping in. There's a lot of, you got to dot a lot of I's and cross a lot of T's and get to Raleigh, to the state capitol, and file to run. But a lot of folks were angry that he waited until, 24 hours from the deadline to say, oh, I'm not going to run, which meant others had to really, jump through hoops to get there. And also there was a lot of, there were some other folks that, would have been legitimate candidates that had already committed to run for other, for state house or some other office that, potentially would have been interested in running for the congressional seat had they known that he wasn't going to run. And a lot of them blame him for, my opponent, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say, is the least qualified of the 435 members of Congress. He has no education, no experience, no anything other than having an R next to his name. And I think there are a lot of Republicans that really blame Mark Meadows for that happening, that he denied them the opportunity to have qualified candidates competing.
But that was he did that on purpose, right? Because they were trying to replace this Linda Bennett, right, and into that seat.
Yeah, Linda Bennett was Mark Meadows' wife, and Miss Bennett are best friends, and so it clearly came out that it was an effort to orchestrate putting her in his seat. In fact, Meadows' brother had created the web domain for Miss Bennett back in October, well before Meadows had announced he wasn't going to run. They'd already, they had their ducks in a row so that she was ready to jump in immediately when he announced he was not going to run, and others didn't get the benefit of that. And so, the speculation, when I was a judge up in Washington, the speculation was that Meadows had three things in mind. He was not going to run for re-election. He wanted Mick Mulvaney's job as chief of staff, and he wants to run in 2022 for Richard Burr's Senate seat. So he's actually done two of those three since then. And so it'll be interesting to see if he, there's a lot of speculation here in North Carolina. Burr is not running for re-election. And Laura Trump, right now in polls is the leading contender on the Republican side to run for that seat. So it'll be interesting to see whether Meadows wants to go against the Trump family and compete for that.
Yeah. Do you are you going to still be involved in politics now, or are you going to pursue other activities?
I don't know. It's only been a little over a month. So if I had to make a decision right this moment, I don't have any plans to run. But like I said, all the boundaries are going to get redrawn here in a few months. I think the district, as I said, is going to get a little less red than it is. So yeah, I definitely want to stay engaged. I'm still disappointed. For me, the outcome of the election financially is probably better for me that I lost. I mean, it would have been, living in DC and having a second home and travel and all that probably would have, cost money. I'm retired from the military, so I get every month, I get my retired military check, my retired federal employee check. I go to the VA hospital for healthcare. So I'm really not adversely impacted by the election, but I know for so many people in this district aren't that fortunate. And I'm really disappointed that I just don't see, anything good happening. Like I said, my opponent is not very well qualified, and he's in the minority, so he's not going to be able to get anything done. So I'm disappointed for the folks here in Western North Carolina that deserve better.
I know you were championing a lot of things that were lacking there, like broadband. I remember you talking a lot about that, and the fact that people don't even have very good internet connections in parts of your region there. I would.
Less than 50% of the population has access to broadband, and in today's environment, you're behind if you don't have broadband.
So I'd imagine there's a place for you to run again, and maybe try to use the time to figure out what would make that difference, what would get some of those people on board, those younger people. We have a question. Yeah, I have a question here from Robert Todd. Robert?
Yeah, thank you for calling on me, David. Mo, I've been doing a lot of reading over time that emphasizes the appeal of emotion over intellect in elections. And I'm really kind of interested in your personal experience. Did you find that was true in your race? And if it was true, how do you meld your appeal on an emotional level, on an identity level, with your ideas as a politician and what you want to do as a public servant?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think folks tended to vote based on emotion rather than on fact. It's like for me, I was portrayed, at the end of the day, there were several $1 million of super PAC, dark money. They got dumped into the district to run attack ads against me that portrayed me as, the defund the police. I actually worked in law enforcement and served in the military, but the other side portrayed me as being anti-law enforcement and un-American and a socialist. And that resonated, with folks that, that was all they heard. It really hurt. Like we're talking about the broadband thing. I ended up, we use Zoom quite a bit to try to reach voters, but we've got such big areas here where, like I said, 50% of the population doesn't have broadband, so you can't reach them by Zoom. You've got to be there in person. And with COVID, we chose not to, have those kind of events because of public health. So I think, the key to it, I think if I had it to do over again is, number one, early on, Seth Moulton, from Massachusetts, spoke with me, and he said, his advice was, look, you got to go for the throat. He said, in a district like yours, that's a Republican leaning district, he looked back at the Doug Jones, when Doug Jones won in Alabama last time, it was because they were Roy Moore was such an offensive opponent, just morally offensive, that a lot of Republicans just couldn't vote for him. And Doug Jones won. And of course, this time he ran against Tommy Tuberville, and he lost by quite a lot. But, in hindsight, I wish I'd have listened to Seth Moulton, because my opponent just has in addition to being unqualified, he's just a horrible human being. So I wish we'd have more aggressively gone after him. And I wish we'd have had the ability to be able to do those in-person events. Because when people got to meet me, they, a lot of folks said, gee, I saw those ads about, you being a socialist, and, what in the hell was up with that? But by not being able to go out and do that, it was a real handicap. But you're right. I mean, people, I think at the end of the day, like I said, if you look at the results, it was pretty much party line. There was very little ticket splitting in this election. And it was, here in North Carolina and pretty much across the country, over 75% of voters, registered voters, voted. So it was a huge turnout. And it'll be interesting, with the midterm election coming up, it'll be a much lower turnout. So it's going to be a question of which party really can energize their voters and get them out to the polls in November of 2022. So I'm hoping we can do some work and I don't know if we can replicate what Stacey Abrams did down in Georgia, but we need a ground game like that here in North Carolina if we're gonna win. I guess one other thing I forgot to mention, again, I mentioned gerrymandering. You know, we have 13 districts here. If you look at the vote, the total number of votes that were cast for the House races, it was almost a 50-50 split. I think the Republicans got, I think, 50.02%, and Democrats had 49.98% of the vote. So it's almost an even divide. But the Republicans won 8 seats and the Democrats won 5. So it's kind of hard to explain how a 50-50 vote results in a 62-38 allocation of the seats other than gerrymandering. So, the Republicans gained seats in our state. Yeah, they gained seats in our state house. So I wish I could say I'm optimistic that the new districts will be drawn more fairly. So that's one thing we're looking at doing. You know, we've got money left over from the campaign, is how can we use that to be helpful in 2022? And one way might be to try to work on an educational campaign on fair districting, because it's just not right. You know, a 50-50 vote shouldn't result in a 62-38 allocation of seats.
Yeah, that was the big hope that the Democrats would win back state houses, but that didn't seem to happen this time. I have a question here about the Open Skies Treaty, about the U.S. Announcing in May they would withdraw in 6 months, and that just happened. That time was just up at the end of November. Pompeo announced. How do you see that affecting the relationship with, say, Russia?
Yeah, it's, again, I think Trump is trying to do as much damage as possible before leaving office. I think most folks that I knew in the military thought that it was, that on the whole it was a positive, having the overflights. Of course, they're scrapping the plane that was used to do that to make it more difficult for Biden to try to come in and resurrect the program. But I would certainly be in favor of getting back in. Again, I think there are more positives. It's not a perfect program, but I think the positives outweigh the negatives.
Yeah. I was also curious. What type of outreach did you have from the Democratic Committee, support from them when you were running, interaction from other House members? Did you have much contact with them?
Yeah, I was, again, I guess in hindsight, I was a little disappointed. The folks, the local Democratic Party, folk here really worked hard. So I have I have nothing but respect for the work that they did. From the national level, I was a little disappointed. And I was fortunate. I've talked to some of the other Democratic candidates that ran in North Carolina and lost, that got no support whatsoever. We were able to, election night, I got a call from Steny Hoyer, and he said, "Boy, your polling was crap." He said, "Of course, everybody else's polling was crap too." He mentioned Jamie Harrison and Amy McGrath and several other races that polling showed were going to be competitive that weren't. So he said, one of the things we've got to do between now and in 2022 is figure out what's wrong with our polling. Because again, our polling kept showing that this was a close race, and it turned out it wasn't. But so I was a little disappointed on the DCCC side. They did come in kind of late, but I had a lot of support. Steny Hoyer, Ted Lieu from California, Seth Moulton, Tammy Duckworth, David Price from here in North Carolina, Abigail Spanberger from Virginia. God, I can't think of the other. There were about a dozen currently serving members that kicked in money and advice and were really helpful. And I really appreciated their efforts. But I think at the national level, I'm hoping, again, I think with Sean Patrick Mahoney taking over the DCCC, I think they're going to be more aggressive. And I'd love to see, I felt pretty fortunate. Like I said, we ended up raising about $2.3 million, which again, I just don't know that advertising, that kind of stuff really made much of a difference this time around. But some of the other folks, we want Democrats to run for, every seat. But for a lot of them, they got absolutely, the DCCC wouldn't even answer the phone for them. And it seems like we ought to have at least some, some base level of support for folks that are going to, stand up and throw their hat in the ring, knowing that they're probably not going to win. But if the party, if it's what the party wants, then the party ought to have some support for that as well. So I know a lot of, some of the other folks that I've talked to are a little disappointed that the party didn't support them.
I suppose they thought it was that there wasn't a chance to win there. Was that what they were?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we had a couple of folks I knew here that they're in districts where it was a 30+ point Republican district, and I understand you want to put your resources where you think you can make a difference. But if we want people to compete for every seat, then there ought to be some base level of support that comes with that, rather than just putting people out there on their own and saying thanks for your effort.
And I see that so far they've gained 10 seats, the Republicans in the House, which was thoroughly unexpected.
Right.
And there's still 2 seats to be called. I see it. Iowa, and they're within a handful of votes. Iowa is the difference in the 2nd district is 6 votes out of 400,000 votes in that district. 6 is down to 6 votes separating the 2 candidates. And I think the district in New York is also tightened within like 15 votes. What are they going to do with those 2 seats? How will that be resolved? Will they automatically have recounts? And because when you get to numbers that close, every recount will sway it quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that should be resolved before the official swearing in is, I think, January. I think actually especially January 3rd, which I think falls on a Sunday. So I think it's January 4th. So hopefully over the next couple of weeks, I'll get that sorted out. But you're exactly right. I think the expectation coming in to election day the Democrats would expand their majority rather than lose seats. So again, that's kind of what leads me to worry that we need to do some work before 2022, or that narrow majority we've got is going to go away, and that's really going to make it difficult for Joe Biden. Well,
on that note, I'd like to thank you so much again for joining us, Mo. It's real special to hear it from the horse's mouth in North Carolina, Western North Carolina. Like I said in the summer, your election just stood out as such an interesting race between the first of all the Trump and Mark Meadows not having their candidate win, and then Madison Cawthorn coming on, and then you going up against them, and your own personal story so interesting. And of course, Madison now is going to. I think he was 29 when he was running. He just turned 30 before the election, which is the absolute minimum. So he'll be now the youngest member in Congress, much younger than Ocasio-Cortez. And so I'm sure he will get a lot of coverage from that. So I think people will be looking back at you even more who ran against him. Yeah, he just turned 25. 25 is it? Yeah, 25 is the minimum age. He turned 25 on August 1st. So right. He's actually 6 years younger. That's right. Yeah. That's right. 25 for Congress. For House, I was thinking the 30s for the Senate. That's right. He's going to get a lot of attention just for being that young. And right. Like you said, he's a good-looking kid. I think that's probably on posters or stuff. He looks probably that was enough for them. Like you said, a bumper sticker. Mm-hmm. Hey, listen, before going on, I really appreciate many of you supported the campaign. I really am grateful to you for your support. And I thank you for doing that. And when the pandemic's over, once we get the vaccine, if you haven't been to Western North Carolina, you owe it yourself to come to Asheville. I think I mentioned before, we're #2 in the country in breweries per capita behind Portland, Maine.
But
Wow.
it's a beautiful place with wonderful people, and I hope you'll come visit.
Thanks so much. We'd love to see you. That's a Smokies there, right?
Yes, it is.
Yes, that's great. Well, we look forward to that. Thank you so much, Mo, for being with us, and we'll be definitely following you to see what you're up to next. And if you do, when you're doing something exciting, chime in, and love to see you again.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, and thank you everyone for joining in at the American Club of Hamburg. This is probably our last event for the year. We've had, as soon as COVID hit back in March, we immediately pivoted to Zoom events. I think we've had about 26 since then. So we've had quite a pace of speakers from politics, business, and culture, and we're glad you could join tonight, this evening. And so if you want to unmute yourself for a moment just to say goodbye and thanks to Mo, please do. And everybody stay safe. Wish you all happy holidays coming up and a good passage into the new year.
Thank you.
Good night,
Thank you,
everyone.
Mo.
Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you,
Thank you very
Mo.
much. Thank you,
Bye.
Congressman.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Merry
Bye-bye.
Christmas to everybody. Stay healthy.
Yeah.
You too.
Thank you. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye.